energy impact of its own estate, and it's a large estate in terms of the city centre particularly. Also, you did just intimate in the question you just answered a minute ago, I'd like to know as well, how is this being used as an example to other developers of areas that are being developed within the city as a model maybe that they should be using? We've got a lot of areas that are being developed. St John's, Mayfield, those are city centre ones. There are plenty of other examples across the city. And I'd like to hear that we are telling them what we are doing and use it as an example of good practice, because I believe it is good practice.
Does someone come back on that, or can we just agree that we will do something to get this information out there, whether that's put something on the website, do a press release, whatever suggestions people have got, to make that more public and to encourage other people to get involved in that?
No, absolutely, yeah. And communications is part of the Zero Carbon Coordination Group, so we really want to up our game on the communications. The specific point on the technical side is how we promote that to other areas in the city. I know there are other, I'm not an expert on heat networks, but there are other areas in the city where they've been looking at similar approaches, so we can take that away. Okay,
point 3 is the MCC Estate Transformation Programme. I'd probably take point 3 and point 4 together. The MCC is the Estates Rationalisation Plan. So we're assuming this covers buildings that we're closing or getting rid of, and what we're doing with the buildings that are left. So does someone want to ask some questions on that? Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to be clear, particularly about point 4. We're talking here about, again, the influence that the City Council has, so it's limited to that aspect. You know, we have less staff, there have been major cuts forced upon the council, and therefore we have less staff. In reality, is this just less staff, therefore less buildings, or is it, what element of it is actually a more proactive approach? The reality, you know, as I say, is if you've got less people, you have less places for them need to work. But what is the balance between the two? Because I don't think that's quite clear in here, from my point of view.
Okay, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that point, it says in the quote, continue to undertake rationalisation of identified council buildings whilst calculating carbon savings. But of course, those buildings, whether they're rationalised or not, will go on for public-private usage and will incur carbon output. So I think it's connecting to the point I made earlier actually about we can define what the council is responsible for and what it isn't responsible for, but within that rationalisation programme, is there any requirement if it is then sold on to a developer, etc., that they meet, you know, zero carbon ideally, but to reduce that carbon output as much as possible?
Again, I'm not an expert on the stage, but I'll explain what I think the case is. So our position in the past on buildings that we've transferred out of the council's use has been that we only report on buildings where we are responsible for paying the energy bills on those buildings. That does include some operating buildings on our behalf, like Bridgewater Hall, for instance. So it's not just that they are occupied by the council, there is a rationale for doing that. I think it's one of the areas, to be honest, where within the decision-making element we talked about before, that is one of the things we want to look at in terms of what we're asking for when we either do leases or disposals, and how we're using our powers to do that. So I wouldn't say we're doing that across the board at the moment. I think it's one of the things we want to look at in terms of our levers as a council when we own assets, freehold, or we're leasing out buildings. What actually are we asking for of the future tenants of those buildings? Because for a reporting basis, we would record those savings, and in terms of rationalising our estate, if we no longer require a building, we would record those savings as a reduction in consumption. But obviously, like you say, that building goes on to be used by others in the city, so we do need to be clear about what levers we have.
Yeah, Richard,
just really quickly. And I guess then we want assurances that somewhere within a model of viability, when deciding in the procurement process, or rather the selling process, who to lease a building to or sell a building to, that any future carbon output is almost monetised, so that we understand that, okay, you know, it might be quite an attractive lease for the council. However, if it's going to increase carbon emissions within the city by X percentage, then we need to take that into consideration over another offer, for example. So it's just trying to, and also get a little bit of legal assurance if that is even possible. I know that the council will have a specific policy in its lease arrangements. And it's probably a question for the city solicitor, to be honest, so I appreciate that it's a hard one. But to get further assurances that policies exist that means that we can make those decisions based on net zero carbon target.
So is that okay? Can we take that away and come back with an answer about where we stand with that? Is that all right?
Sorry, did you want me to answer the first question just briefly? I think it's a combination of, obviously, the number of staff we have got has reduced substantially over the past few years. Equally, we're working very differently, so it's things like 7 to 10 desk ratios, supporting people so we don't always have to go back to an office space, and supporting people to work where it's most appropriate, so it's a combination.
Just on this point as well, we've got reference to 13 buildings and we've got reference to 15 buildings in the other document, I think, or the other way around. Can we just have a list of which buildings we're talking about and why we're only, and the total number of buildings that we've got and why we're talking about just these 15 or 13 buildings, how they've been chosen? Is that okay?
Yeah, and then we could bring something back to the next meeting. Obviously, our operational estate is quite complex. It's around about 350 buildings we would report on. The rationale, very briefly, they looked at the top 20 emitting buildings at the time of the carbon reduction programme. There were reasons why some of those couldn't be included in the scheme, so the final number is 13, and that is the capital approval for spend on those buildings is 13 buildings, so we can provide more detail about what's happening in each of those buildings.
Yeah, and I think what would be useful as well is a time scale of when we're going to be able to look at these other buildings, you know, and at what point we think we'll have dealt with all the buildings that we have. So can we get that as well?
That's the work we're doing at the minute. There's a very significant price tag to doing everything. So we're making sure we align it with the asset management plan when works have to be done, because you can get considerable efficiencies if we look at the carbon measures and the repairs at the same time, and also where we'll have the biggest impact.
Right, we've got to point 5. So point 5, which is where financially viable, implement suggested actions from energy audits to evaluate impact on energy consumption and carbon emissions. Mandy.
It seems to me that there's quite a lot to unpack in here, because there's a qualifier where financially viable. Obviously, we are all very, very conscious of the impact of the lack of money that the council's got. So we know that we're working under those constraints, but what's that tipping point? And what can we do to ensure that, and what are we doing to ensure that wherever we can do something that improves our position, that we are doing those energy audits, including really just the small things like making sure people switch off lights.
So we'll back on that now.
I'll have a go. Yeah, so within the kind of the work that the states are doing, they're looking at 3 areas. So one is reduce, so kind of what are the energy efficiency measures we can place in buildings. Some of that, I think, is proven technology, and it's about implementing that where we can. Then they're looking at produce, which is production of energy from our estate, so solar PV and heat pumps, or possibly more ambitious things. Other councils have done some really innovative things. We're trying to look at what are the opportunities for production, and then the final area would be then to start connecting, so microgrids, buildings. That is more of the innovative space. We're not really there yet. I think we're moving probably from reduce, which we kind of understand quite well, into the production space, and that's where our kind of thinking around phase 3 of the buildings work is going to be. So we'll continue to do the proven technology bits, but really, as Carol said earlier on, if we're going to look at the big ticket items, we need to be looking at energy production across our estate where possible. Some of that, obviously, the investment models for doing that need looking at. I wouldn't say we're there yet, because there's a question about financial budgets and carbon budgets and how we apply that to our estate. So the previous carbon reduction programme, return on investment wise, paid itself back quite easily because of there was a rationale for doing that. Obviously, as the low hanging fruit has gone, it gets harder to do that. So that is again part of what we're looking at within the group.
Yeah, Richard?
Just to focus on the financial viable aspect of it, I guess. It's always quite, I always get a little bit worried when people mention financial viability and cost-benefit analysis when we talk about climate change, because obviously we're in a climate emergency. Is there any assessment being done on the cost of not doing something? And I think that it would be good to understand exactly the thought process that is meant by the words financial viability or cost-benefit analysis, because it seems to be a moving goalpost for the urgency now is pretty critical, and so what pound sign do we put on not doing that work?
Someone answer that, or is that something else we can come back to as well? Because I think that is key to what we're trying to do here, isn't it? Is that something that the group...
I won't answer it, but I'll make a comment. I think in the past we've looked at things financially. What we're trying to do is look at viability of a financial budget and a carbon budget at the same time. So we look at the impact of both and consider, when you talk about cost benefit and stuff, look at the impact on both. The other thing specifically in relation to this issue is we do have a finite budget. We can't increase it exponentially. What we can do is look at the balance of works within that. Can we increase it a bit? How we recycle the energy savings so we cover more of the buildings and get the balance between works which have the cash payback quite quickly, that then we can scale up the rest, but at the same time using some resource to do things which have a big impact but don't necessarily have the cash payback. And we're going to have to learn on our feet with some of that, the best way of doing it. But what we want to do is come with that balance that gives us the biggest carbon impact overall.
So I think as we go on in this committee, this is what we need to understand. So we need to be looking at decisions that have been made and plans that we've got, and looking at how those decisions have been made. Now, whether that's something that can be explained as an answer to that question, or whether it's something that will come up time and time again when we're looking at what we're planning to do, I don't think really matters, but this is the sort of level of information that we are going to want, because we need to understand what's happening. And you know, we don't want glossy presentations, we want the detail of what's happening and to understand why these decisions are being made, because ultimately we may have to change the way we are making decisions in this council. You know, so I think if you can take that away, if you can bring something back in general terms, that's fine, but even if you can't, I think as we're going forward, we're going to want to be reviewing how all of these things are going and seeing what decisions have been made and how that balance has been looked at. Is that all right?
That's fine. I think it's helpful if at the end of this we take stock on which of the priority areas so we can do proper justice rather than trying to do everything at the same time.
Right, so the next one is deliver carbon, this is number 6, deliver carbon savings from the MCC operational estates leisure facilities. Manager, were you going to say something on that?
Yes, I was. Sorry. I'm really conscious that some of our leisure facilities buildings are probably some of our most troublesome ones, because if they've got a swimming pool, we know that those are really, really energy intensive. And so there's obviously must be a very special piece of work going on here, I would have thought, to look at the options. There's a leisure facility that was put up in my ward in 2015. I remember asking questions at the time then about whether or not it was not possible, for example, to have a heat pump in order to ensure that we could keep the pool warm, and the answer was at that time no, because of the cost of it, and it was right at the start of all of the cuts. However, we're now in a different world, and this might be a good opportunity to get deeper understanding here about what you're talking about when you're saying you need to incorporate carbon budgets and financial targets. And look, there's also, these are big buildings, there are massive opportunities here, aren't there, for energy production, I would have thought. I'll answer that.
That's a caveat with that. I'm not an expert on the leisure estate, but obviously you're exactly right. I think particularly the wet leisure centres are big emitters, and which is why we did on the previous plan that you've got in front of you, which was drafted in 2016, did make specific reference to the leisure estate. So some of that is kind of general refurbishment and energy efficiency measures, but particularly things like heating poles is obviously a big element of that. I know some of them have put CHPs in, which is a more efficient way of doing that, but it still uses gas. It's certainly not zero carbon. So we also have had some third-party operators in those buildings, so previously Serco and now Greenwich Leisure operating some of those buildings. So they are ones we do report on as part of our annual reporting. But I think that again comes back to some of the decision-making stuff we've just talked about in terms of how we've made decisions on buildings, and as the technology's moved on now, what is the kind of decision-making process within the capital programme that takes into account carbon reduction as well as obviously within the financial that Carol's just explained. I think we are working through that. So I think leisure buildings are a really interesting case study of that, particularly because of the nature of their operation. But obviously we also know of the health benefits that they bring to the city, and we all recognise that they're important to residents as well. So trying to achieve both of those objectives is really key to that.
So can we get some detail on this one again, a list of what we've got and where we're up to? Sorry, Lynn.
No, I was going to say that it's good to hear, but I mean, for example, we've just finished on site, haven't we? So, but I imagine that was not done within the new parameters that we're talking about. It'd be quite interesting to see a case study of what the carbon outcome was and is anticipated to be, and whether anything more can be done. And then, I mean, I don't know which leisure centre is next in line for a makeover. I don't know what refurbishment you call it technically, don't you? But can those lessons, what can we specifically learn from the one that was most recently done to what can be done next?
Yeah, so can we get a report on that to look at? Is that all right?
Probably need a buildings expert next. Obviously, you're going to need some detail on some of these case studies, and I think we're going to need this information. We've got the right person in front of you who can answer that from the operational estate perspective. So we can certainly do that for the next meeting.
Do the committee want to do that, to look at this? I mean, I think this is an example of everything that we're doing with buildings, isn't it? So is it worth looking at that example? Moss Side Leisure Centre has been done very, very recently, hasn't it? So can we get someone along next time to do that? Is that right, Lee? Right, the next one, develop and deliver an MCC operational buildings carbon reduction plan. William?
I think when I looked at this, I saw it as double counting, although it is referenced into point 3. But I think you've also just described some of the actions that are being taken about this assessment of buildings. I guess I was really just wondering, how effective that's going to be. And again, it lends itself back to, that's great, it's our stock, but what about all the other stock? You have answered some of those questions, but that was the gist of it.
So I think we need to kind of bring all this building stuff together, don't we, in future? And we need to be looking at the buildings we've got, the buildings we're leasing out, and all the points that were raised earlier. So if, when we come back with this document, we can kind of put all these together, and then we can just have a section where we're just looking every time at our buildings and what's going on there. That would be useful, I think. Point 8 is ways of working. Someone want to say something on this? Mandy?
So, I'm not really sure. Is this still about buildings, or is it about how we use our building? I didn't really quite understand what this point meant. It a bit like William said about 0.7, it seemed like double counting. So is it about how people work in buildings? Is it about hot desking, for example? And what is it? What does this mean, I suppose?
Yeah, no, it is about that. Yeah, it's about how efficient we are using the buildings we've got. And obviously, things like technology is an enabler of different ways of working. So we have in our ways of working policy now at the council. So it is kind of estates-led in terms of the efficiency of the buildings we've got and how we use them and utilise that space. But I think since the plan's been written, I think we've done some really good work around our ways of working in terms of how staff use buildings. Carol mentioned things like ratios before, that's part of it, and the ability to work from home, etc. all allows us to use our estate in a different way.
Thank you for that. Are we measuring it? Have we got a base point?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I have to speak to estates and probably human resources and creation development team. Yeah.
So I think with buildings and what's going on within them, again, we just need the information we can understand. What are the carbon emissions? Whether you separate it out, I don't know. I'm no expert in this either. Whether it makes sense to separate out what's going on in the building from the building itself, I don't know. Probably not. But whatever the ways that you need to do it, we need to know what the carbon emissions are from our buildings and the work that's going on within them, and how we can reduce that, and how much we need to reduce it by, and how we're doing with that. So I think, again, that's probably something that this committee needs to look at to get us that sort of level of detail, because otherwise we're just kind of trying to do something but it's not absolutely clear what it is. So can we take that away and come back with something, with some figures to it that we can look at?
And I think there's a bit of keep it simple, so we understand the impact on our estate and the impact on staff travel, and then we avoid the risk of double counting things as well.
Yeah. No, so was it? Point 9 is zero carbon Manchester 2050. So I think we can raise. Sorry, put my microphone on. Zero carbon Manchester 2050 is point 9. I think we can raise lots of issues about dates and various things here. Richard.
I'll make a point about the dates, but just a general point I think is that we can get a little bit caught up, I think, on target dates, and we can also get a little bit mixed up with the carbon budget limits that are forever pressing, and it's getting worryingly so actually, because I think, actually when you look at how far we've been the last 4 years and the percentage of the budget we've taken up already, and we still seem to be talking about it, and nothing, the issue is still pressing. But I think the point that I'm sure that the committee will agree that we have discussed is about how we judge our target and ambition